That winter night, I opened the forbidden door to the funeral home and saw my own brother doing something horrific with my best friend's body. There, my childhood world collapsed forever. But what happened after was even worse, because when I tried to scream, he looked at me with those cold eyes and said, "If you tell anyone, you'll be next." For 60 years I carried this secret that almost killed me inside. A story of family, horror, silence, but also of courage and liberation. But before continuing, tell me something. Where are you listening to me from? Write in the comments the name of your city or neighborhood. I love knowing how far my voice is reaching, you know? Now let's get back to the story. My name is Clara Mendez, and today, at 74 years old, I look through the window of my simple house here in Oregon and see children playing in the street. The sound of their laughter transports me to a childhood I never truly had. A childhood that was stolen by the weight of secrets no child should carry. You need to understand something. I was born and raised in Salem, Oregon, at a time when the city was still small, everyone knew each other, and family secrets were kept under lock and key. It was the year 1952, and my father, Anthony Mendez, was the only funeral director in town. The mortician, as everyone called him, with that tone of respect mixed with fear. And our house. Oh my God, our house shared a wall with the funeral home. Imagine, a girl growing up with the constant smell of formaldehyde that stuck to your skin and wouldn't come off even with a bath. The murmur of candles that never went out. And that heavy silence that only exists in places where death lives. Our family was separated from the dead by only an old wooden door, painted dark brown, which should always remain locked with 2 large rusty keys. But I was a curious, lonely child, and I learned early how to open that forbidden door when my father went to the cemetery. My mother, Helen, lived sighing, always in black, always with that distant look of someone carrying an invisible burden. She prepared meals in silence, cleaned the house in silence, and only spoke when necessary. "Clara, come eat. Clara, go do your homework. Clara, don't make noise." It was as if our house were an extension of the cemetery, a place where even the living walked like ghosts. At school, I was known as the mortician's daughter. The other children avoided me, as if I brought misfortune in my shadow. They whispered gory stories whenever I passed through the corridors of the elementary school, crossed themselves when they saw me, and their mothers literally pulled them away when they met me on the street. "Stay away from that girl. She brings bad luck," I heard them whisper. "A mortician's daughter attracts death." Imagine what that was like for a child of 7, 8 years old, growing up feeling that you're different, that you carry some curse just for being the daughter of someone who takes care of the dead. I would come home crying, asking my mother why people were afraid of me, but she would just sigh and say, "It's the price we pay, Clara. Our family takes care of those who have departed. It's sacred work, but heavy." My only true companion was Olivia, a girl with curly hair, a smile as sweet as honey, brown eyes that sparkled with hope, who dreamed of being a teacher. She lived 3 houses from ours, daughter of Mrs. Teresa, who sold sweets at the town square. Olivia was the only one who saw in me not the mortician's daughter, but simply Clara, a friend who needed affection and understanding. Olivia talked about the books she wanted to teach someday, about the children she would guide, about a bright future that seemed within reach of her small, delicate hands. "Clara," she would tell me while we played school in my backyard, "when I'm a teacher, you'll be my assistant. We'll both teach children to read and write, and they'll learn that it doesn't matter what your father's job is. What matters is a person's heart." We were inseparable. She came to our house almost every day after school, played with me in the backyard full of weeds, and never, ever showed fear or disgust at the smell of formaldehyde that stuck to my clothes and hair. When the other children made circles and didn't call me, Olivia stayed with me. When they saw me, Olivia came running in my direction. "Someday we'll leave this small town," she dreamed aloud, "and we'll go to a place where no one will care what our parents do. You'll see, Clara. The world is bigger than Salem." How I loved those dreams of hers. How I needed to believe there was a different future for me, away from that smell of death, away from those looks of fear and prejudice. But fate. Oh, fate is cruel to the innocent. When Olivia got sick in the winter of 1963, a fever that wouldn't go away, a dry cough that wouldn't get better, a tiredness that took over her frail little body, I prayed every night on my knees on the cold floor of my room. I prayed the rosary my mother taught me, asked Our Lady of Grace, promised never to disobey again if God would cure my only friend. When they took her for treatment in Portland, in an old ambulance that made the sound of a dying engine, I counted the days until her return like someone counting their own heartbeats. 23 days. 23 days I spent looking out the window, waiting to see her smile coming up the cobblestone street. And when the news came, when Mrs. Teresa came crying to our door, her face swollen from so much crying, to tell us that Olivia had died at 14. Oh my God, I cried like I had never cried in my life. I cried not only for the loss of my only friend, but for the cruel discovery that not even my most sincere prayers, not my most desperate promises, had power against fate. Olivia's body came home in a small, sealed coffin covered with white flowers that my mother helped arrange. And that's when my life turned into a nightmare that would last 60 years, because there was someone in my family, someone I could never imagine capable of such a horrible thing. My brother Silvio, 3 years older than me, had always been strange, always watching everything with those ice-cold eyes, always too quiet, always prowling around the funeral home when he thought no one was watching. But I never could have imagined what he was capable of doing to bodies that should rest in peace. And on a winter night, I'll never forget, on a night when the wind howled outside like a lost soul, beating on the windows like desperate ghost hands, I discovered a secret that would change my life forever. It was on a winter night in 1963, July 15th, a date that was engraved on my soul like a branding iron. I was only 11 years old, and I remember it like it was yesterday. The wind howled outside like a lost soul, making the tiles of our old house tremble, and the whole structure creaked with that cutting cold that entered through the cracks of the wooden windows, deteriorated by time. My mother Helen had prepared chamomile tea for all of us before bed. It was a sacred ritual in our house, an attempt by her to bring a little peace to that environment loaded with sadness. The sweet smell still hung in the small kitchen, mixed with the persistent aroma of formaldehyde that never completely left our nostrils. I remember that day, during dinner, my father Anthony had mentioned that a body would arrive at dawn, an accident on the highway, a truck driver who lost control on the mountain curve. "There's going to be a lot of activity tomorrow," he said, slowly chewing beans with flour. "The family comes early. They want the wake at the church." My mother just nodded silently, as she always did when the subject was work. I was in my small room, lying on an iron bed that creaked with every movement, trying to fall asleep under a patchwork quilt my grandmother had made before she died. But sleep wouldn't come. Since Olivia had died 2 weeks before, I lived in constant insomnia, always imagining her arriving at my door with that sweet smile, saying that everything had just been a terrible nightmare. That's when I heard strange noises coming from the funeral home. They weren't the normal noises, that heavy silence I already knew, or my father's cautious steps when he worked at dawn. They were different noises, disturbing, like something heavy being dragged across the cement floor, muffled whispers that seemed like conversations with ghosts, and a low moan, almost animal-like, that gave me chills all over. You have to understand, at that time, I already had the sick habit of peeking through the keyhole of the forbidden door. It was stronger than me, a child's curiosity mixed with deep loneliness, and perhaps a morbid need to understand that world of death that surrounded our family like a constant shadow. My father always said in his grave, serious voice, "Clara, never, never enter the funeral home during the night. It's dangerous. The dead deserve respect, and there are things a girl shouldn't see." But that night, oh, that damned night, I disobeyed. I went down the wooden stairs trying not to make noise, stepping on the sides of the steps because I knew exactly where they creaked. My heart was beating so hard in my chest that I thought everyone in the house would hear. The hallway was plunged in almost complete darkness, only the weak silvery light of the moon coming through the back window, creating strange shadows on the peeling walls. When I got close to the forbidden door, the noises became clearer, more disturbing. And that's when I made the mistake that would haunt me for 60 years. I opened that door. My God in heaven. Even today, more than half a century later, I still wake up screaming when I dream about that infernal scene. My brother Silvio was in there, bent over the cold marble table where the bodies rested. But it wasn't the truck driver who was there. It was my Olivia, my sweet friend, who should have been resting in peace in the cemetery. She was uncovered, her skin pale as candle wax, her curly hair spread across the cold table, and oh my God, he was doing a horrible thing, something an 11-year-old child shouldn't even know existed in this world. His hands moved over her body in a way that made my stomach turn, while he moaned softly like an animal in heat. I couldn't properly process what I was seeing. My childish mind simply had no reference for that absolute horror. But something in my chest shattered at that moment. Not only because of the terrible desecration of my best friend's body, but because of the devastating discovery that evil could live within one's own family, under the same roof where I slept every night. When I tried to back away silently, I stepped on a loose floorboard that creaked loudly like a scream. Silvio turned instantly, with wild eyes shining in the gloom, his face sweaty and distorted by an expression I had never seen before. A mixture of lust, rage, and panic that froze the blood in my veins. For a second, that seemed like a damned eternity. We both stared at each other in silence. Me, a terrified girl in a white nightgown, trembling like a green stick. He, my own blood brother, with a diabolical expression that completely transformed the face I had known since forever. "Clara," he whispered in a hoarse voice, approaching slowly like a predator cornering its prey. "What are you doing here, you little pest?" I tried to scream, but my throat was completely closed. I tried to run, but my legs felt like jelly. And that's when he grabbed my arm with brutal force that left purple marks for weeks, his fingers digging into my skin like claws. "If you tell anyone," he growled in my ear with hot, nauseating breath that smelled of whiskey and rot, "you'll be next. Do you understand me well, Clara? The next one to be here on this table." He shook me with such violence that my head hit the brick wall. Tears ran down my face like a waterfall, but I couldn't even cry properly. Fear had taken over every cell in my body, paralyzing me as if I were a rag doll. "Nobody will believe you anyway," he continued, with a cruel smile on his lips that revealed yellowed teeth from smoking. "You're just a crazy girl, a mortician's daughter. Who's going to believe that I, the eldest son, the responsible one, the one who helps Dad with the sacred work, did anything? And you're nothing. Less than nothing." He let me go with a violent push, and I fell on the cold hallway floor, scraping my knees on the rough cement. "Go to sleep, Clara, and forget what you saw. Because if you don't forget, well, accidents happen, right? Especially with girls who are too curious and stick their noses where they shouldn't." I went up the stairs, staggering like a drunk, my legs shaking so much I could barely balance. I entered my room, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night awake, curled up under the covers like a wounded animal. It wasn't just fear. It was the terrible feeling that something fundamental had died inside me that night. Innocence, perhaps. Trust in family. The certainty that the world made any sense. For days that seemed like years, I carried that damn secret like corrosive poison in my chest. At school, I could no longer pay attention to Miss Martha's classes. At home, I avoided looking directly at Silvio, but I felt the weight of his gaze following me through every corner of the house, as if he could read my thoughts. My mother, Helen, immediately noticed that something terrible was wrong. "Clara, you're acting strange, little one. Do you have a fever? Are you sick? Did something happen at school?" How could I explain to her that the disease was living in our own family? How could I tell my mother that her eldest son was a monster who violated the dead? But the silence. The silence was literally killing me inside, consuming me like acid. And a week after that terrible night, during a silent dinner, as all dinners were in that cursed house, I finally found a courage I didn't know existed inside me to break the pact of terror that Silvio had imposed on my childish soul. And what happened after that confession changed our family forever, split our surname in half, and taught me that sometimes the truth is more destructive than any lie. It was a Thursday, July 23rd, 1963. I remember the date because it was the anniversary of my paternal grandmother's death, and my mother Helen always lit a special candle on that day. Dinner was being served at our small kitchen table. Rice, black beans, a piece of cheap meat my father had bought at Mr. Joaquin's butcher shop, and cassava flour that my mother toasted every morning on the wood stove. As always, silence weighed over us like a shroud. My father Anthony chewed slowly, thoughtfully, probably calculating how many coffins he would need to order for the following week. My mother Helen pushed food around her plate without much appetite, sighing from time to time. My younger brother, Francisco, then only 5 years old, swung his little legs in the high chair, oblivious to the heavy atmosphere that hung over our table. And Silvio. Silvio was there, eating normally, as if nothing had happened. As if he weren't the monster I had caught desecrating my best friend's body a week before. He even smiled at me when he saw me looking, a cold smile that made me nauseous. During that terrible week, I had visibly lost weight. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't pretend everything was normal. At school, Miss Martha had sent a note to my mother asking if I was sick, because I spent entire classes with a lost look, as if I were in another world. "Clara, you need to eat," my mother said that night, pushing the plate in my direction. "You're too thin, daughter. You're worrying me." That's when something inside me exploded. Maybe it was the tone of genuine concern in my mother's voice. Maybe it was Silvio's cynical smile. Maybe it was the unbearable weight of that secret that was literally killing me inside. Or maybe it was the memory of my sweet Olivia, who deserved justice even after death. "I can't eat," I said, my voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. "I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't pretend everything's normal when it's not." My father stopped chewing and looked at me with those serious eyes, accustomed to reading suffering on the faces of bereaved families. "What's happening, Clara?" Silvio shot me a warning look that tried to silence me, but I had already reached my limit. The truth wanted to come out of my throat like a dammed river that finally breaks the dam. "It's Silvio," I said, and the words came out in a desperate torrent. "I saw what he did to Olivia. I saw it, Dad, in the funeral home. He was doing something horrible to her body." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother dropped her fork on the plate with a metallic sound that echoed through the small kitchen. Francisco stopped swinging his legs and looked at us without understanding. My father became completely motionless, as if he had turned into a pillar of salt. And Silvio. Silvio got up from the table so violently that the chair fell backwards with a crash. "This girl is making up stories," he screamed, his face red with rage. "She's going crazy, Dad. She's seeing things that don't exist." "Clara," my mother whispered with a strangled voice. "What are you saying, daughter? Are you sure of what you saw?" "I'm sure, Mom," I replied, tears streaming down my face like a waterfall. He threatened me afterwards. Said if I told, he would do the same thing to me. Said nobody would believe me because I'm just a crazy girl. My father slowly got up from the table, and for the first time in my life, I saw an expression I had never seen on his face. It wasn't just anger, it was a primitive, ancestral fury, the kind of hatred only a father feels when he discovers someone has violated something sacred. "Silvio," he said in a low, dangerous voice, "look me straight in the eyes and tell me this isn't true." "Of course it's not true, Dad," Silvio lied shamelessly. "Clara is making all this up. She's always been strange, always had these sick fantasies." But something in my father's look told me he knew. Maybe because he knew his own son better than we imagined. Maybe because, as an experienced man, he knew how to distinguish truth from lies in a child's eyes. Or maybe because, deep in his heart, he already suspected something strange about Silvio's behavior. "Go up to your room," my father ordered Silvio, with a voice that cut like a razor. "Now." "Dad, I swear that—" "Now!" My father's scream echoed through the entire house, making Francisco start crying and my mother cross herself 3 times in a row. Silvio went up the stairs, stomping hard, like a bratty child, but I could see fear in his eyes for the first time. That same night, after Francisco fell asleep and I was put to bed, I heard my parents talking in the kitchen. My mother's voice was choked with crying, and my father's sounded like distant thunder. "Anthony, what if it's true? What if our son? My God, how are we going to live with something like this?" "If it's true," my father replied with iron determination, "he'll pay. Son or no son, he'll pay." The next day, my father did something that changed the course of our family history forever. He locked the funeral home with a padlock and hid all the keys. Then, with a patience I didn't know he possessed, he made me tell everything again, in the smallest details, while he wrote down every word in an old notebook. "Clara," he told me, holding my trembling little hands, "what you told me is very serious. If it's true, I need to take action. But first, I need to be absolutely sure." That's when he set a trap for his own son. He placed a body in the funeral home, an elderly lady who had died of old age, and pretended to leave the house. But he hid in the backyard, watching, waiting, and Silvio fell into the trap like a hungry rat. My father caught his own son red-handed, doing exactly what I had reported. What happened that night, what my father did to Silvio, was something our family could never forget. The beating he gave my brother lasted almost an hour. I heard the screams, the blows, the pleas for forgiveness through the walls of the house. My mother cried in the kitchen, praying the rosary and asking for divine mercy, and I hid under the bed, covering my ears, but knowing that finally justice was being done. When it was all over, my father came down the stairs with torn clothes and bleeding knuckles. Silvio was locked in his room, and the next day, an ambulance arrived at our door. "We'll tell the town he's sick," my father announced with a tired voice, "that he needs specialized treatment in Portland. Nobody will ever know the truth." And that's how my brother Silvio was committed to a psychiatric hospital, erased from the official narrative of our family. To Salem, he was just studying away. The first great secret of the Mendez family had been sealed with blood, tears, and silence. But the scars that remained in me, those nobody could see. And they were these invisible wounds that would accompany me for the next 60 years of my life. After Silvio was committed, our house became different. It wasn't just the silence, it was a heavier type of silence, loaded with shame and unspoken secrets. My mother Helen began to watch me obsessively, as if I were a wounded bird that could fly away at any moment. She no longer let me be alone, wouldn't let me go out to play in the street, and every night she came to my room 3-4 times just to make sure I was sleeping. Mom is afraid something will happen to me, I thought, seeing her standing at my bedroom door, making the sign of the cross every time she looked at me. But I knew her fear was deeper than that. It was the fear that I would tell someone in town what had really happened to Silvio. My mother began to talk even less than before. She dressed always in black now, not only when going to wakes, but every day, as if she were in permanent mourning. She stopped going to Sunday Mass, stopped talking to neighbors at the gate, stopped buying sweets from Mrs. Teresa's stand, Olivia's mother. It was as if she had died along with the secret we now carried. The nightmares arrived like unwelcome visitors and never left again. Every night I dreamed of that horrible scene in the funeral home, but in dreams it was even worse. Sometimes who was on the table was no longer Olivia, it was me. Sometimes it was my mother. Sometimes it was other girls from school, all pale as wax, all looking at me with those glassy eyes of the dead, blaming me for not having saved them. I would wake up screaming, sweaty, with my heart beating so hard it seemed like it would come out of my mouth. My mother would run to my room with her white nightgown fluttering like a ghost, rock me in her thin arms, and whisper prayers in my ear until I could fall asleep again. Our Father, who art in heaven, Hail Mary, full of grace. The words repeated like a macabre lullaby. During the day, I lived in a state of constant alert. Any noise made me jump, any shadow made me tremble. The smell of formaldehyde, which before was just part of our life, now made me nauseous. I would vomit every time I passed near the funeral home, which my father had locked with 3 different padlocks after what happened. At school, I became a ghost. Miss Martha tried to get me to participate in classes, called my name 2-3 times until I realized she was talking to me. Her words reached me as if they came from far away, muffled, meaningless. Clara, can you solve this problem on the board? But I just looked at her without understanding, as if I were seeing through a thick fog. The other children, who already avoided me before for being the mortician's daughter, now looked at me with a different morbid curiosity. They knew something terrible had happened in my family, because in a small town like Salem, secrets have legs and walk faster than people. Mothers whispered at the school door, pointed discreetly at me, pulled their children away when I passed. Clara is strange, I heard them whisper in the hallways. They say her brother went crazy and was committed. My mother said something ugly happened at the mortician's house. Better stay away from that cursed family. I heard he messed with the dead. Fear of men settled in my chest like a second nature. Any man who came near me, the baker with his large, hairy hands, the mailman who always tried to make a joke, my father's friends who came to drink whiskey in the backyard, made me tremble and break into a cold sweat. I saw Silvio's face in all of them, heard his voice threatening to make me the next one. My father noticed this and became even more protective, but at the same time, more distant. It was as if he was ashamed to look at me, as if I carried the guilt for what his own son had done. He stopped calling me little one, stopped making those clumsy caresses on my head. Now he spoke to me only when necessary. Clara, go help your mother in the kitchen. Clara, go do your homework. Clara, don't make noise. My younger brother, Francisco, who at the time was only 6 years old, could sense something was wrong, but didn't understand what. He would ask me, Clara, why doesn't Silvio come back anymore? Is he sick? And I didn't know what to answer, because how do you explain to a child that the older brother was a monster? The years dragged on like this, heavy as chains on my feet. I grew up too fast, lost the childhood that was already difficult, And at 16, I was a haunted girl woman, too thin, too quiet, with the look of someone who had already seen what they shouldn't see. My body had grown, but my soul was frozen on that terrible winter night. At school, I had no friends. The other girls my age were starting to talk about boys, dances, dating. But I couldn't even imagine these things without feeling panic. How could I think about kissing a boy if the idea of any masculine touch made me vomit? That's when my parents made a decision that would change my life again: arrange a marriage for me. "Clara needs protection," I heard my mother whispering to my father one night, thinking I was asleep. "She can't stay here forever, carrying this weight. She's 18 years old, should have married already. She needs a good man who'll take care of her, who'll take her away from here, away from these memories." "But what if she tells?" my father asked with a worried voice. "What if she tells her husband what happened with Silvio?" "She won't tell," my mother replied with certainty. "She knows it would be the family's ruin. She's a good girl. She'll keep the secret." I was 18 when they introduced me to Paul Henry Santos, a 28-year-old accountant who worked in a neighboring town called Bend. He was tall, had brown hair always well-combed with brilliantine, wore thick-rimmed glasses that gave a serious air to his face, and spoke softly with refined education. My parents had met him through the church priest, a serious, hard-working, practicing Catholic young man without vices, as my mother liked to repeat like a mantra. When Paul came to our house for the first time to meet me on a Sunday afternoon after Mass, I trembled so much that I dropped the cup of coffee with milk I was serving him. The sound of the porcelain breaking on the floor echoed through the small living room like a gunshot. I bent down to collect the pieces, cut my finger, and started crying in despair. Paul immediately got up, took a clean handkerchief from his shirt pocket, and said in a gentle voice, "Don't worry, Clara, I also get nervous when I meet new people." He helped me clean up the mess, bandaged my cut finger with delicacy, and made no comment about my exaggerated nervousness. They were simple words, but there was a kindness in them that I wasn't used to hearing. During the 3 months of courtship we had, always with my mother nearby, always in the living room, always short and respectful conversations, Paul never tried to touch me beyond a polite handshake at the end of visits. He never made indecent comments, never looked at me strangely, never showed impatience with my extreme shyness or the fact that I barely spoke during his visits. But I was terrified of the idea of marriage, because marriage meant intimacy, and intimacy meant, well, it meant things that reminded me of Silvio and that horrible night. I cried hidden in my room every night, imagining how it would be to have to explain to Paul why I was so afraid, why I woke up screaming, why I couldn't be touched without panicking. The ceremony was simple, at Salem's main church, on a cold September morning in 1969. I wore a white dress borrowed from Mrs. Mercedes's daughter, a veil my mother had worn at her own wedding 20-something years before, and a small bouquet of white roses my father had cut from the cemetery garden, the only beautiful flowers that grew in that town. During the entire ceremony, while the priest spoke about the sacred duties of matrimony, I looked at Paul and tried to decipher what kind of man he really was. Would he be gentle as he appeared, or would he hide some evil behind those glasses, as I had learned men could hide? Our honeymoon was at a simple inn in the Oregon mountains, a small place that smelled of wood and fireplace, and it was there that the miracle that saved my life happened. On the first night, when Paul realized I was trembling like a leaf, with eyes wide with terror, he stopped everything he was doing, sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Clara, tell me what's happening." "Are you afraid of me? Did I do something wrong?" I began to cry compulsively, sobs that came from deep in my soul, tears I had kept for years. And then, for the second time in my life, I found courage to tell the truth. I told Paul everything, about Silvio, about Olivia, about that terrible night, about the nightmares that wouldn't let me sleep. about the fear I carried inside my chest like a malignant tumor. Paul listened to me in absolute silence, holding my hand with delicacy, without judging me, without interrupting me, without showing disgust or repulsion. When I finished speaking, he hugged me with a gentleness I didn't know existed in the world. "Clara," he said with tears in his eyes behind his glasses, "I'm sorry for what you went through, but I want you to know something. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving to you that not all men are like your brother. I'll have all the patience necessary. We'll go at your pace, your way. Don't be in a hurry." And he kept that sacred promise. Paul had infinite patience with me. Months passed before I could be touched without panicking. A whole year before we could have true intimacy as husband and wife. But he never complained, never pressured me, never made me feel broken or defective. "Let's get out of here," he told me 6 months after the wedding, when he realized I still woke up screaming every night. "Let's go to Oregon, start over, away from all this, away from these memories. You deserve to be happy, Clara." And that's how at 19 I left Salem behind, as if I were fleeing from a fire that threatened to consume me. I took only a small suitcase with my clothes, a photo of Olivia I kept hidden between the pages of the Bible, and the hope that it was possible to be happy after so much suffering. In Oregon, in a small town called Eugene, Paul and I built a new life from scratch. He opened a small accounting office on a downtown street, and I learned to be a housewife, wife, and finally, after 3 years of marriage and lots of love and patience, mother. I had 3 children with Paul, Marina, Carlos, and Roberto. Each pregnancy was a victory against fear. Each birth was proof that my body could create life and not just witness death. My children grew up without knowing anything about Salem, about the funeral home, about Silvio. For them, life had begun there in Oregon, with parents who loved each other and a normal, happy family. For 40 blessed years, I managed to be happy. Paul kept his promise of protection until the last day, when lung cancer took him at 67. I mourned his departure as if I were mourning the death of my own salvation, but I also thanked God every day. He had given me 4 decades of peace, 7 beautiful grandchildren, and proof that it was possible to rebuild a life after horror. But the past, the past never sleeps completely. And when my mother Helen died at 89 in 2003, I knew I would have to return to Salem for the first time in more than 30 years. And it was on this return that I discovered that our family's secrets were even darker than I had imagined. My dear ones, this is only the first part of my story. What I discovered when I returned to Salem for my mother's funeral. The yellowed letters I found in the attic. The secrets she kept for decades. All of this completely changed what I thought I knew about my family. If you want to know the rest, about Silvio's disturbing confessions, about the truth my mother Helen hid until she died, about how I finally managed to find peace after 60 years carrying this burden, leave a comment down below. Tell me if you want me to continue telling this story that marked my life forever, because there's still a lot you need to know about the Mendez family secrets. And don't forget to tell me where you're listening from. I want to know if my voice is reaching you, wherever you are. A loving hug from a grandmother who learned that sometimes telling the truth is the only way to free yourself from the past. Clara Mendez, 74 years old, here from my little corner in Oregon.